What started as a mission to bring peace to Eastern Congo is now spiraling into something far more dangerous, one that could pull South Africa and Rwanda into a direct military confrontation. And at the heart of this growing tension is the Democratic Republic of Congo's president, Felix Tshisekedi. It all began when South Africa, under the Southern African Development Community, SADC, sent troops into Eastern Congo to deal with the rising threat of the M23 rebels. For years, this armed group had caused devastation in the region, forcing thousands to flee their homes. But instead of bringing stability, South African soldiers soon found themselves in the middle of an all-out war. What was meant to be a peacekeeping mission quickly turned into a nightmare. Bullets tore through the air, grenades exploded without warning, and missiles rained down on troops who had been expecting a very different kind of operation. The battle was relentless, and the situation took a deadly turn when 13 South African soldiers lost their lives in combat. Then came the moment that sent shockwaves through the world. Harrowing footage emerged of South African troops waving a white flag. It was a universal sign of surrender, a desperate attempt to survive, but one that raised even bigger questions. Who was responsible for this bloodshed? As the dust settled, the accusations came fast and hard. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa wasted no time pointing fingers, and his accusations were direct. Rwandan President Paul Kagame, he claimed, was the one fueling the flames of this conflict. According to Ramaphosa, Kagame had been secretly supporting and arming the M23 rebels, the very group that had turned the mission into a battlefield. The message from South Africa's Minister of Defence was crystal clear. The blood of the fallen soldiers was now on Kagame's hands. And if Rwanda didn't back down, South Africa was prepared to respond militarily. Kagame, however, wasn't having any of it. The moment accusations started flying in his direction, he struck back just as fiercely, rejecting every claim and shifting the blame right back onto South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. From Kagame's perspective, the real issue wasn't Rwandan involvement in the M23 conflict. It was South Africa stepping into a fight it didn't fully understand. To him, Ramaphosa and his government had waded into the chaos of the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, without truly grasping the deep-rooted complexities of the war, and he didn't just say it behind closed doors. In a bold and public Twitter statement, Kagame laid out his stance in plain terms, making sure the world knew where he stood. He claimed that South Africa's mission in the DRC wasn't about peace at all. Instead, according to him, it was an outright combat operation, one designed to prop up the Congolese government against its own people. Even worse, he accused South African forces of fighting alongside genocidal militias, specifically naming the FDLR, a rebel group notorious for its hostility toward Rwanda. His words carried an unmistakable edge, almost daring Ramaphosa to reconsider his position. If South Africa wants to contribute to peaceful solutions, that's one thing, but if it prefers confrontation, Rwanda will handle it on those terms, any day. It was a clear message. Kagame wasn't backing down. But he didn't stop there. Kagame took things a step further, making it personal. He accused Ramaphosa of distorting private conversations between the two leaders, twisting their discussions into something that fit South Africa's political agenda. According to Kagame, he had spoken with Ramaphosa twice that very week to discuss the crisis. But what South African officials were telling the media, he claimed, wasn't just inaccurate. It was full of deliberate lies and misleading statements. And then came the remark that cut through all the political formalities, a sharp jab that felt more like a direct challenge. If Ramaphosa ever gave me a warning, he must have said it in a language I don't understand. It was Kagame's way of saying that whatever warning South Africa was talking about never actually happened, or at least not in a way that mattered to him. Meanwhile, back in South Africa, Ramaphosa had his own message to send. Taking to Twitter, he struck a somber yet strategic tone. While Kagame had gone on the offensive, Ramaphosa focused on something far more emotional: the 13 South African soldiers who had been killed in action. Their deaths were a painful reminder that this conflict wasn't just about politics. It was about real people, real lives lost in a war that was spiraling out of control. As he mourned the fallen soldiers, his words carried another message, one that Rwanda and the rest of the world couldn't ignore. For the outside world, this was being framed as a straightforward conflict, South Africa was stepping in to help the DRC fight the M23 rebels, and Rwanda was the villain secretly backing them. At least that's the version that President Cyril Ramaphosa seemed to support. He pointed fingers directly at the M23 rebels and the Rwandan Defence Force, RDF, reinforcing a long-standing narrative that Paul Kagame's government was the real mastermind behind the crisis in eastern Congo. But then, in a move no one saw coming, Kagame flipped the entire story upside down. Instead of dodging the blame or launching a vague diplomatic response, he hit back with a stunning counterclaim. According to him, the South African soldiers who lost their lives weren't killed by M23 rebels at all. They were killed by the very people they had come to help, the Congolese army itself, known as FARDC. And, in a twist that sent shockwaves through the political landscape, Kagame claimed that Ramaphosa had already admitted this in private. President Ramaphosa confirmed to me that M23 did not kill the South African soldiers, FARDC did. With that single statement, Kagame shifted the focus of the entire conflict. If he was telling the truth, then everything South Africa believed about this mission was a lie. The implications were staggering. If FARDC was behind the deaths of South African soldiers, then this wasn't just a tragic battlefield casualty. This was a political betrayal. The troops deployed under the Southern African Development Community, SADC, peace mission were supposed to be there to reinforce the Congolese government's fight against rebel forces. But instead, they had been caught in the crossfire of a much more complex, dangerous game, one where even their supposed allies could turn on them. And that raised an even bigger, more troubling question. Why would the Congolese army target its own allies? That's when critics started connecting the dots, and the emerging picture wasn't just messy, it was downright disturbing. Some analysts pointed to a hidden political strategy at play, one that suggested that President Felix Tshisekedi wasn't truly interested in ending the conflict, because keeping the war alive actually worked in his favour. If the fighting stopped, the focus would shift. Suddenly, the world wouldn't just be looking at M23 and Rwanda, they'd be looking at Tshisekedi himself. And that was a problem. A prolonged war allowed him to maintain international sympathy, secure continuous foreign aid, and keep a tight grip on power. And by constantly blaming Kagame and Rwanda, he could redirect attention away from the internal failures of his own administration. To Kagame, this wasn't just a theory, it was something he had been saying for years. He has long accused Tshisekedi of playing the eternal victim, using the M23 rebellion as a political shield to protect himself from accountability. In public, Tshisekedi remains firm in his claim that M23 is nothing more than a Rwandan-backed militia, a foreign force destabilizing Congo. But Kagame insists that behind closed doors, Tshisekedi knows the real story. According to him, M23 is made up of Congolese Tutsis, people who are part of the DRC, not outsiders. And then came the most glaring red flag. When Kenyan President William Ruto and other East African leaders pushed for a ceasefire summit, urging both the Congolese government and M23 to meet at the negotiation table, Tshisekedi refused to attend. That decision alone spoke volumes. Because if his true goal was peace, why would he dodge the very discussion that could bring it? To Kagame, the answer couldn't be clearer. Tshisekedi had no real intention of ending the war, because as long as Congo remained a war zone, he remained the leader of a country in crisis. A chaotic DRC meant continued global sympathy, international funding, and an extended hold on power. But if the fighting stopped, then suddenly, Tshisekedi would have to answer for the things that war had kept hidden: corruption, economic instability, political failures. And that could threaten something even bigger than the conflict itself. What do you think is going to happen in the coming days? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below.